Kota Hirono's Hellsing is a more character-focused piece of fiction than a narrative-driven manga, mainly because the story is often in service of brutal character moments, rather than being the other way around. However, that was not the approach that Studio Gonzo took when Hellsing was adapted for animation the first time around. In 2001, Kota Hirono had not yet finished his epic tale of gore and glory, and so certain storyline changes were necessary for Hellsing 2001 to even feel like a finished product. And with that also comes the inclusion of several characters that aren't in the original manga or the later OVA series. Hellsing 2001 actually treats the Hellsing organization like a proper paramilitary unit, and the result is a tapestry of rich and intriguing personalities who actually contribute to plot progression instead of just standing around and being either useless or awesome. The result is a far more engaging story with varying beats and bumps along the way, and it just wouldn't be the same had Studio Gonzo retained the original cast for their adaptation. So, without further ado, here are 10 Hellsing 2001 characters that don't appear in Hellsing Ultimate. Explored. Peter Ferguson. Let's start off this list with perhaps the best addition to the cast of Hellsing 2001, the commander of Hellsing's ground operations, Captain Peter Ferguson. In the original manga, the Hellsing organization is nothing but a manor filled with expendable meat sacks, where the only people who actually matter are two vampires, the organization's leader and her personal butler. In the 2001 series, Hellsing is a full-fledged government military organization, complete with bureaucratic issues and a private standing army. Peter Ferguson is the man in charge of that army, and he is bloody brilliant at his job, we'll tell you that much. Ferguson was a captain in the British Army during the Gulf War before he was given an honorable discharge and reassigned to Hellsing for his immense pedigree. He ran the special military unit of Hellsing like a well-oiled machine, and was an understanding yet decisive figure, as evidenced by his first mission with Ceres Victoria. The newly made vampire was having trouble engaging her targets because she still retained her humanity within her heart, and so Ferguson simply ordered another sniper to take care of the job instead of pushing Ceres to do something she wasn't prepared to do. Instead of chewing her out for her incompetence, Ferguson gives her guidance and compassion, both of which end up making him sort of a father figure for Ceres. His relationship with her can actually be compared to the one she has with Walter in the manga series, although they retain that dynamic in Hellsing 2001 as well. Ferguson was one of the only people who survived the Valentine brothers' assault on Hellsing Manor, and he remained dedicated to Integra and her family until his last breath. He was shot and killed at the Tower of London conflict by an unwitting British Army sniper whose actions were condemned later on because the army was in the process of saluting Ferguson for his heroism. Even Alucard, who usually doesn't have time for the human elements of Hellsing, seems to respect Ferguson, and that is the highest praise a mere mortal can hope to achieve. Peter's unfortunate death hit harder than Walter's betrayal in Hellsing Ultimate, and yeah, we said it. Gareth Henderson. When Sir Integra Wingate's Fairbrook Hellsing praises you as one of her best soldiers, you know you must have been exceptional at your job. Too bad then that Gareth Henderson was given that distinction only after his demise. The dark-haired and gray-eyed captain of the Hellsing Special Military Unit was the sniper who took care of the job Ceres couldn't that we spoke of in the last entry. Gareth was an elite sniper who barely missed a shot and was a commander without peer, under whom countless Hellsing soldiers had served with pride and honor. But the reason he sticks out to us is because he was also one of the first people who treated Ceres like a normal part of the organization instead of a freak vampire like everyone else did. Ferguson treated Ceres like his daughter, but that kind of hospitality wasn't extended to her by the rest of the squad. Even Integra gave Ceres a cold shoulder during her early days with the group, but Gareth accepted her from the very beginning. He was the one who gave her the anti-Midian rifle as her first proper weapon of choice and expressed confidence in her abilities as a fighter. Gareth teaches Ceres how to kill a vampire in theory, but before he can give her a practical demonstration, his squad is called to duty. Turns out this would be the last time either of them would see each other alive, because in a mission to capture a freak vampire, Gareth was slain by the Vatican's top killer, nicknamed God's Assassin, who was in service to the secret Chapter 13 Iscariot, Father Alexander Anderson. Despite knowing that Gareth was a human soldier in service to essentially the same god as him, Anderson ruthlessly kills him by throwing a holy bayonet in his spine, and then proceeds to wreck house until Alucard arrives. Integra later acknowledges his worth during a meeting with Anderson's overseer, Enrico Maxwell, where she spits venom in Maxwell's face because his mad dog took out one of her best men. But for every great soldier in your ranks, you're also going to find a rotten apple or two. And the next entry on our list is exactly that. Brian Stadler. Stadler was the replacement captain for the fallen Gareth Henderson, and on paper, he had an impressive record. So impressive, in fact, that the usually meticulous Ferguson decided to take him on based off his credentials alone. Though, truth be told, Hellsing had started hurting for resources since the first episode itself. Stadler was brought in to head Gareth's old squad, and it immediately becomes clear that he is nothing like what his papers show him to be. He immediately makes sexist remarks and lecherous advances towards Saris upon meeting her, and deliberately allows human casualties to occur during his first op with Hellsing, despite knowing precisely where his targets were holed up. After Stadler joins Hellsing, suddenly footage of the top-secret organization's top-secret work starts leaking to local news stations, and Integra is forced to figure out just who the rat was in her organization. It didn't take long for Saris to put two and two together and realize it was actually Stadler who was facilitating the distribution of vampiric snuff films and leaking footage of Hellsing's operations to the press. He was eventually busted by her and Alucard in a dingy warehouse in the middle of recording yet another snuff to expose the Hellsing organization. And the worst thing about him isn't even the fact that he was a disgusting pervert or a literal traitor, it's that he thought he was justified in doing so. Stadler's argument for recording his fellow soldiers was that Hellsing worked completely in the shadows, and he wanted recognition for his own actions beyond a simple pat on the back from a person who technically doesn't even exist. So he orchestrated a plan to expose the organization to the public eye so he could then publicly start taking credit for everything he accomplished with them. Pretty gut-wrenching stuff if you ask us, considering Stadler showed zero remorse for the people who ended up dying for his ambition to come to life, but it pales in comparison to his partner in crime. Kim Chapman. What's worse than a hack journalist these days? One that doesn't think manufacturing stories violates the ethics of journalism, obviously, but Kim Chapman takes that to the extreme. We all know that chasing a good story is in the nature of any journalist, but when it involves the death of unwitting humans at the hands of supernatural beasts, and you just stand there watching, it becomes hard to justify the idea that you're just doing your job. Kim Chapman was introduced in episode 2 as the civilian that Saris was supposed to protect on her first Hellsing op. She was out with a man and stumbled onto a vampire feeding in a dingy alleyway. Kim stood there transfixed as the vampire turned its sights towards her and leapt at her for a warmer meal. But we thought it was due to fear in that episode. It quickly becomes clear that the case is anything but. We next see her as part of the same broadcast we mentioned in the last entry, and that's when we learn that Kim is a news anchor for Channel 10. She was the one who broke the story about the existence of vampires in Britain, and also rolled the footage that Stadler had managed to siphon off to her. But where he did it outwardly for personal reasons, Kim's paper-thin defense of being a journalist that's just doing her duty is what makes her such a morally disgusting character to us. And apparently Integra as well, because she decides that Kim's crime was too great for humanity's laws to judge. See, in episode 4 of Hellsing, the organization is forced to deal with someone trying to expose both the existence of vampires in society and the existence of Hellsing as an anti-vampire task force. The first happened through snuff films created by a fetishist known as Flesh, who would tape vampires killing humans under false pretexts and post them on dark web black rooms. This guy was eventually apprehended by Hellsing, but it is easy to figure out that he was one of the people who supplied Kim with the evidence she was so gleefully displaying on national television. But Flesh's capture did not stop her. She just found another vampiric snuff enthusiast and did it all over again until Alucard and Saris were able to neutralize her whole operation. Just because she wanted to make a name for herself, not only did Kim Chapman solicit and fabricate evidence, she also stood by and watched as innocent people lost their lives. Sure, the targets were almost always drug addicts or some other kind of degenerate, but this is not a case where the ends justify the means or even vice versa. For being such an inhuman bystander despite being a human herself, Integra decides that Kim deserves an inhuman death and allows Alucard to drink her blood and take her soul. And good riddance at that, if you ask us. At least her death motivated Saris to go drink her medicated tomato juice packs and not just starve herself as she had been for the opening third of Hellsing 2001. Enrico Stivalletti. This guy was the definition of a side character, but that doesn't mean his story wasn't interesting. Enrico Stivalletti was an Italian exchange student who was studying in Britain and had allegedly fallen in love with another student named Mick. Mick must have either had some kind of chronic disease or maybe he ran up on the wrong ends or something, because Enrico loved him enough to undergo a process that turns him into a freak chip vampire, just so him and his lover could live together forever. Well, that is a touching sentiment. In practice, it's horrifying to think of the lengths that this guy, who had come to Britain on an exchange program, went to in order to affirm his love for another guy who probably didn't even know him that well. And that is nothing to save the fact that Enrico became a literal vampire to do all of this. He was neutralized by special ops, and after being placed in a morgue, Enrico's freak chip was removed in hopes that it would keep him from acting like an undead zombie. Those hopes were dashed when he woke up and started turning everyone he came across into ghouls, all in an attempt to get back to Mick. Hellsing's special military unit was deployed to deal with the threat, with Sarah's Victoria taking lead in a proper mission for the first time. But that's not the only reason why this character is so remarkable. In Hellsing 2001, Enrico's vampirization and eventual rampage serves as the basis for the arrival of Father Alexander Anderson, one of the most iconic characters created by Coda Hirano, Hellsing's author. Because Stivalletti was an Italian citizen, the Vatican used this technicality to send their monster to England and land a critical blow on those Protestant sows. Luckily, Alucard showed up before Anderson could do any major damage to Ceres, but this just goes to show you just how much attention to detail was paid in the first adaptation of Hellsing. Chris Pickman. What could be better than being called one of the best soldiers in the country by Sir Integra Fairbrook Wingate's Hellsing? Being recognized as a true soldier of Hellsing by the only man who has been with the organization since its inception. That's right, Chris Pickman has the distinct honor of being the only human Alucard overtly shows respect for. Hired in the aftermath of the Valentine brothers' assault on Hellsing Manor, Pickman quickly establishes himself as a more than capable soldier and commander. During the final battle at the Tower of London, Pickman stood his ground against 3 vampirized SAS officers, who managed to turn 2 of his men into ghouls as well mid-battle. Pickman not only survived, but he also assisted Alucard in taking down multiple freak chip vampires in a brief but exhilarating fight montage. His wild energy during battle contrasted perfectly with his stoic demeanor outside of it, and the cherry on top of the cake was him requesting Alucard put him down because he wanted to die as a human. See, at some point during the fight against Incognito's minions, Chris had been bitten himself, and he was in the process of turning by the time him and Alucard had gotten done cleaning house. For his final request, he told the Count that he wanted to die as a human, not as a freak, and Alucard, who respects that kind of thing, takes a shine to his bravado. He dubs Chris Pickman a true soldier of Hellsing and gives him the honor of being laid to rest by his jackal, followed by his face being veiled by Alucard's signature hat. He had a short role, all things considered, but the impact he had on us as viewers was massive. Harry Anders. An MI5 agent who treats Ceres Victoria with incredible suspicion early on, Harry Anders grows into one of the most intriguing characters from Hellsing 2001. He was introduced as an agent from a competing agency who was investigating the same chips that Hellsing had been finding on their recent cleanup missions. His introduction to Ceres was a little rough, given that it took place during the Flesh investigation, but in his next appearance, Harry had considerably softened towards our favorite Draculina. Turns out, he was a part of the Special Police Unit D11, just like Ceres' father, and he knew him as well. Harry was the one who took Ceres to meet a true vampire that wasn't Alucard in an effort to help her with her investigation into the freak chips, hoping to find a few answers for his cases as well. He ends up developing a cordial relationship with Ceres, with a hint of possible romance when he says that if perhaps Ceres was older, their situation would be quite different. But before we can find out his or her thoughts on the proposition, Harry Anders' car explodes in a tragic bombing that sees Ceres let out a proper Scream Queen howl. It's funny how by just introducing one guy from a different department and giving him a few scenes with the female lead of the story, Studio Gonzo was able to give insane depth to the world of Hellsing that is sorely lacking in the original content itself. Harry Anders' inclusion brought in the interdepartmental warfare angle that is so common in military or spy franchises, whilst also giving us third-party perspective on the main focus of the story, which is, of course, killing vampires. Laura. Did you guys know that the esteemed Sir Integra Wingate's Fairbrook Hellsing had a sister? Well, neither did we, or Walter, or Ceres, or Integra herself, because the truth is, Integra was an only child. Yet the moment Laura steps into the scene, everyone, including Walter, who has known Integra since she was a youth, instantly believes that Laura has always been Integra's sister, despite there being no photographic evidence proving the claim. This is because Laura is a Bauban Sith, a female fairy from Scottish folklore that's a cross cross between a succubus and a vampire. According to tales from the Highlands, Baobin Siths were wont to seduce, kill, and then drain the blood of hunters that were lusting for women deep within the woods. Apparently, they would spawn right at the moment the men expressed their desire, but that is clearly not the case in Hellsing 2001, because Integra, as far as we know, isn't into anyone. The reason why Laura was able to convince everyone, including the Hellsing director herself, that she was Integra's sister was due to her telepathic powers. As a Sith with the powers of a vampire, manipulating the minds of those close to her was like child's play. She was able to enchant Integra, Walter, Ferguson, and everyone else who met her the day she walked into Hellsing HQ, except Ceres. The only reason Victoria doesn't fall under Laura's spell is because she's a Draculina herself, so Laura's hypnotic presence is negated by Ceres' supernatural existence, and she can see her for what she truly is, an agent sent to Hellsing to take out the brains of the operation. The ruse of being Integra's distant sister falls through just as soon as it was put up, as Laura corners Integra in her office and proceeds to suck her blood in an attempt to turn her into a ghoul. Of course, this is 2001, so the scene is overtly risque in its depiction of Laura's violating act, and it's only after she commences the blood-sucking that Integra even realizes she doesn't have a sister in the first place. Laura would have turned the biggest foe of supernatural beasts in Britain into the very thing she fought against, had Alucard not intervened at that moment. He manages to save Integra before she starts turning into a ghoul, but he wasn't fast enough to completely prevent the process from beginning. Alucard's master ends up stabbing herself in the neck to drain out the tainted blood from her system before being taken into emergency surgery in an attempt to save her life. Though Laura's role in the story was restricted to a single episode, she managed to leave a long-lasting impression in our minds, and she served as a decent teaser of the actual final boss of Hellsing 2001, whom we'll get to in just a moment. Helena! In Hellsing Ultimate and Kota Hirano's original Hellsing manga, the only true vampires are Alucard, the ones created by Millennium, and that priest from Cheddar who appears in the first volume of Hellsing, whose vampirification is never quite explained. Vampires are not shown to be an extensive society with individuals that have distinct personalities and may even turn out to be non-threatening, all things considered. They are either rabid beasts with a single-minded goal of enslaving people to their wills and causing as much destruction as possible, or they're Alucard, in which case, almost the same thing. But Hellsing 2001 decides to give even the vampires a slice of societal shine, and that's where Helena comes in. She is introduced to the series as Harry Anders' special contact that he wanted to bring Ceres Victoria to, and it is immediately clear that Helena is unlike any other vampire in the entire Hellsing franchise. Her home is covered with books, portraits, and an old gramophone that plays classical music nearly all the time. She appears to be a child, but it is clear that she has lived for multiple decades, even centuries, as evidenced by her dressing style and her formal way of speaking. Not to mention the fact that Helena knows of Hellsing's existence because many of Ceres' predecessors had hunted down her peers like rabid dogs. But Helena herself isn't an aggressive or vengeful vampire. In fact, she's quite the opposite, as she treats Ceres and Harry with nothing but respect, which is doubly impressive for the latter because technically, he is her food source. Helena lives by a motto of live and let live, and it has worked out very well for her, as Hellsing has left her alone for the most part. She helps Ceres understand the difference between an artificial vampire created with freak chips and a true Draculina. Helena helps Ceres realize that she is a truly unique existence, and it is with her encouragement that she ends up drinking blood and stealing her commitment to Alucard. Helena also verbalizes the existential sadness of immortality that is such a core aspect of Alucard's character in the main series. Being immortal sounds good on paper, but some of our viewers must know that getting through even a quarter of a century is tough on human beings, let alone half a dozen of them. Helena has lived longer than she cares to remember, and in the manga and OVA series, this is one of the key character traits that makes Alucard more tragic than maniacal. In Hellsing 2001, Helena ends up meeting a grisly fate as she is eventually devoured by the series' main antagonist, but she does manage to leave Ceres with an empowering parting speech before being mercilessly decapitated. Helena is one of the few vampires we wept for when she turned into a pile of salt, which instantly amplified our hatred for her killer and the last entry on this list. Incognito. One of the things that makes Hellsing Ultimate the cult classic that it is the premise of Nazi vampires invading Britain in 3 Zeppelins as their leader conducts a symphony of death from atop one of them. But in 2001, Hellsing, the manga, was far from being complete. In fact, Millennium had only sparsely been mentioned, and Hirono is infamous for taking hiatus after hiatus. When Studio Gonzo picked up Hellsing for adaptation, they essentially picked up an incomplete work, so they had to improvise with their final villain, and the result was a sorcerous, murderous, sacrilegious vampire that was the exact opposite of Alucard, despite being just like him in many regards. Incognito is a man whose past life is a complete mystery. All we know of him is that he probably comes from Africa, given that his tattoos look like Egyptian glyphs, and that he is the one who has been pulling the strings on everything that happens in Hellsing 2001. From the freak chips to the freakish death of Helena, everything unfolded according to Incognito's master plan, and that plan was to finish off Alucard once and for all. As a vampire, Incognito was unique in that he could use magic to amplify his attacks however he deemed fit. He was shown to be able to phase his head out of reality, which halted bullets right in their tracks, and he was powerful enough to turn an entire SAS squadron into his personal ghoul cronies when he occupied Baobin Castle. Laura worked for him, the Valentine brothers worked for him, and he himself worked for a nameless master who has never actually been revealed to us even today. He managed to sacrifice Integra to summon Set and actually kill Alucard, something even Anderson can't claim to have done. In the end, Incognito meets the same fate that all of Alucard's enemies do, and his death scene is one of the best in the franchise. But that satisfaction is a testament to how effective his character was as a villain. From the moment he shows up, you feel uneasy, and that feeling never goes away. Incognito is one of the better original animation villains we've seen in our time as otakus, and you can fight us on that in the comments section down below. Marvelous verdict! But as for this video, that's gonna have to be it. Kota Hirono's Hellsing is filled with interesting and iconic characters, but we feel like these 10 from the first anime series deserve the same kind of love and recognition as well. Do you want more Hellsing content from us? Let us know down below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next one.